All right, everyone, we're going to do a quick care lecture because there's a big, I guess, colloquially put, elephant in the room, and that is the invasion of the Ukraine by Russia. Now, this is going to be incredibly important for global politics. Why? Because it has everything when we go through it. It has what is power, the ambiguity of power. Even though Russia has a bigger military, is it getting bogged down in a quagmire like the Soviet Union did Afghanistan, like we did in Afghanistan? People don't learn. That's another thing. Do we even learn in global politics, right? Like we did, I was going to say, in Vietnam. It has the idea of alliance building, right? Now, with the invasion of the Ukraine, Russia wants to maintain all of its alliances, Belarus, Turkey, and then other countries are trying to play off both powers. Turkey tries to get, good relations or sustain, good relations with Russia, but at the same time is selling drones to the Ukraine, right? What is the role of oil? Is this invasion disrupting a certain supply chain of oil, mineral wealth, etc.? What about the role of NATO? Did this actually strengthen NATO, something that Putin did not like? And to begin with, his argument was we're being surrounded by NATO. Now it's actually strengthened NATO. We see Finland, we see Sweden, we see all these countries that were essentially, even Switzerland, that were for a long time somewhat neutral, taking a side, and then you basically have the idea of nuclear capability. Right. So why don't we go and say use military force against Russia? Is it because it has nuclear capability? So now everyone's going to want nuclear capability because, wow, if Russia can invade Ukraine and get away with it because it has nuclear capability, that means nuclear capability has a certain role, as we all knew, but this seems to be a different role in global politics. And even more importantly, when we get into economic liberalism, this is going to be so important. The idea of economic liberalism is that, and this will definitely be on a quiz and the test, that as countries become more interdependent economically, the world becomes safer because then we become interdependent. So it's like, I need you and you need me. So war is less likely. However, as Russia became more integrated in the global economy, the idea of economic liberalism, Russia would be more peaceful because it doesn't want to disrupt the order. Or can it be argued that this integration actually helped create chaos and war? Because now countries can't stand up to Russia against this invasion because it depends so much on Russian oil. So that's a whole new thing. So now Russia's using the oil against the European Union and saying, well, we're going to cut you off. And then it gets into just regular military hardware. For years, we were concerned with non-state actors after 9/11. And now with this invasion, it really puts state actors at the forefront of global politics, national security, foreign policy, whatever analysis. So now it's like, wow, it's state on state. And can we have a great war again, which was before World War III was highly unlikely? So as you can see, this invasion of the Ukraine has everything. And in fact, it doesn't just have that. Now, I'm not a supporter of the Ukraine. Now, if you see behind me, I like to take pictures, only use pictures that I have taken by and large. So I said, I've never been to the Ukraine. How can I? Or Russia. But I was actually in a Russian submarine. It's a bar in Cartagena, Colombia, and they had this portrait. So it's like this kind of submarine. It's kind of expensive though. So I didn't, drink once and then you leave. And then they had this portrait of Stalin, Lenin, Marx, and of course Putin. Very interesting, right? Now, of course, I'm not a Russian propagandist, or this is good Russian vodka Putin sent me. So Putin's not such a bad guy after all if he sends me vodka. But seriously, this is really an important subject for global politics because it essentially turns the whole world upside down. In fact, as when we get into arguments like, oh, two countries that have a McDonald's will never fight. Well, they did. We'll never go to war. That idea of global liberalism, economic liberalism, where we get more tied together, we get more peaceful. So is war with us just forever? This is very interesting. And the other idea, and let me flip this, although I'm not supporting the war. I think it's disastrous. It has a migration component, all these different things. We completely ignored when he was, carrying out the Chechen wars. Why? Because they're not like white European Christians. We didn't care about the Chechenians because that was pretty brutal. Why do we ignore it? Is there a race component, religion component in there? And then you have to ask yourself, which is absolutely amazing, the idea of, was Putin right in the sense that we were kicking them when they were down? The idea is that after the fall of the Soviet Union, the United States did encroach upon Soviet influence. And people like Mearsheimer and others were warning about that. You're expanding NATO too strongly, the EU too strongly. We were bombing the former Yugoslavia. We even bombed the Chinese embassy. That was very much against Russia's interests. So the idea is, did we take advantage of Russia? A good example is after World War I, we basically kept Germany down with the Treaty of Versailles, Dawes Plan, etc. After World War II, the goal was to lift Germany up to be kind of a member of society. Some argue that after the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia became poor. I remember one Russian in the embassy when I was living abroad said to me, this was long after the fall of the Berlin Wall, but we're like a third world country now. So did we not, quote unquote, the international community lift Russia up like we did with Germany after World War II? So policy matters. So Putin has been arguing for years, we're being pushed around by the West, etc. Now, even if you don't agree with that argument, did it resonate well at home with the Russians? Basically, like Hitler, with the Treaty of Versailles, always saying, the Treaty of Versailles was pushed down our throats. Is a lot of what happened with Russia, because we didn't have after the fall of the Soviet Union good policy towards Russia. And that's a very important thing to start thinking about in global politics. And I think that this is where we really need to begin with like the first lecture of what's going on. And don't forget places in Estonia, the eastern part of the Ukraine did vote, and not in a sham, but to be part of Russia because they felt like they were part of Russia. And that was kind of marginalized by the West. In fact, there's a Colombian in the Ukraine that actually supports the Russian invasion because he saw how horrible the pro-Ukrainians were to any kind of pro-Russians in the eastern part. So, I mean, what's going on here? I mean, do we always get the full news anyways? Now, I'm not saying anything's fake news, but what happens is we only get half the argument because there's a lot of people in the eastern part of Ukraine and the eastern part of the area that the Soviet Union lost that is still pro-Russia. And they kind of used this and said, hey, we're going to go after. I never thought they would go after Kiev. I mean, the capital city of the Ukraine. That they would go all the way in like this and carry out such a massive war. I thought they would just take that little piece of the Ukraine, like the Crimea, that is pretty much pro-Russia. I mean, it is pretty much pro-Russia. And they have been beaten by a lot of the Ukrainians that hate the pro-Russian elements of their society. But this has been a brutal war. It has refugee status, everything in global politics, like I just said. The ambiguity of power, even though Russia has the power, how it's been kind of in a quagmire, the extent to which we're supporting NATO and NATO is balancing Russia, but yet they're still scared to fight Russia. The supply chain, just ineffable, unexplainable, just disaster with the supply chain all over the world now. attributable to this invasion. And particularly in what's going to happen in the European Union countries for a very cold winter. What is going to happen? And this is incredible. So, as far as global politics, is a very interesting time to be studying this. So, as our somewhat first kind of lecture, well, not first lecture, but one of the first on the more contemporary Ukraine, really start thinking about this. Economic liberalism, good. Can it stop us from fighting? But at the same time, now a lot of countries can't put sanctions on Russia because they depend on Russia. Like India is like, no way, we can't do this. Right? I don't even know, should we be putting sanctions on Russia? And that should be a debate question now. So I might add a debate to the class. So take care, everyone. And if you have any questions, just ask in community forum.